What happens when a high-profile guest completely loses control during a live television interview, forcing the host into a decision no one saw coming, one that shocks millions of viewers in real time? It sounds like something straight out of scripted drama, but for Michael Strahan, it became a reality that unfolded right before his eyes and in front of a nationwide audience. Having hosted Good Morning America for years, Michael had built a reputation as one of the most composed and adaptable figures in morning television. He had handled unpredictable guests, navigated uncomfortable silences, recovered from technical breakdowns, and managed countless live moments where things didn't go exactly as planned. In a world where anything can happen once the cameras start rolling, he prided himself on staying calm, professional, and in control. But even with all that experience behind him, nothing could have prepared him for the intensity and unpredictability of what was about to unfold on this particular morning. The excitement around the segment had started long before the cameras turned on. Producers were thrilled when they secured Meghan Markle for an exclusive interview. It was seen as a major booking, one that would boost ratings, generate headlines, and create buzz across social media platforms. Meetings were held, segments were planned, and every detail was carefully organized to ensure the interview would run smoothly. The expectation was clear. This would be a polished, engaging, and positive conversation that viewers would enjoy. Meghan's team provided a list of approved topics, ensuring there would be no surprises or controversial questions. Everything about the setup suggested that this would be just another successful, routine segment. Behind the scenes, the studio was alive with its usual pre-show rhythm. Crew members moved quickly but efficiently, adjusting lighting to create the perfect tone, checking camera angles for the best shots, and testing microphones to ensure crystal-clear audio. Assistants coordinated last-minute details, producers monitored every element from the control room, and the floor director kept everything on schedule. Michael, meanwhile, sat calmly reviewing his notes, mentally preparing for the conversation. He understood the importance of balance, being engaging but respectful, curious but controlled. It was a skill he had mastered over years of experience. When Meghan arrived, she appeared exactly as expected, confident, composed, and completely in control. She greeted staff members with a warm smile, moved through hair and makeup with ease, and showed no signs of discomfort or tension. There was nothing unusual about her behavior, nothing to suggest that anything was out of place. Her publicist stayed nearby, quietly ensuring everything aligned with the agreed plan. To everyone in the room, it seemed like this would be one of those effortless interviews where everything simply clicks. As the countdown to live broadcast began, the energy in the studio shifted slightly, focused, alert, but still calm. Michael took his position on set, sitting across from Meghan in a carefully arranged interview space designed to feel natural and inviting. Two chairs angled toward each other, a small table between them with fresh flowers and soft lighting that created a warm, welcoming atmosphere. It was the perfect setting for a relaxed and engaging conversation. Then the cameras went live. Michael smoothly transitioned into his on-air presence, greeting viewers with his signature confidence and warmth. His introduction was seamless, his tone inviting, and his body language open and professional. Meghan responded in kind, her voice steady, her answers articulate, and her demeanor polished. The conversation began exactly as planned, covering her recent projects, her charitable work, and her perspectives on various topics. There was a natural rhythm to the exchange, the kind that makes interviews feel effortless and enjoyable to watch. For several minutes, everything went perfectly. The crew relaxed, producers nodded in approval, and the segment unfolded just as expected. There were no awkward pauses, no unexpected turns, no signs of tension. It was the kind of interview that fades into the background of a morning show, pleasant, professional, and entirely predictable. But then, almost imperceptibly at first, something changed. It started with a simple question, one that should have been easy to answer. Michael asked about her experiences with media and how she approaches different types of interviews. It was a routine follow-up, the kind of question designed to deepen the conversation without introducing risk. Yet the moment the question was asked, something in Meghan's expression shifted. Her tone changed, her posture adjusted slightly, and the energy between them became noticeably different. What had been a smooth, controlled conversation suddenly felt uncertain. The calm atmosphere that had defined the interview just moments earlier began to fade, replaced by a subtle tension that spread across the set. Crew members sensed it immediately, even if they couldn't yet explain it. Producers leaned forward in their chairs, watching more closely. Michael, drawing on years of experience, recognized the shift but remained composed, ready to guide the conversation wherever it might go. Because in live television, everything can change in an instant, and this was the moment where everything began to unravel. Without warning, Meghan Markle's tone sharpened and her demeanor shifted in a way that was impossible to ignore, transforming what had begun as a composed and cordial exchange into something far more tense, emotionally charged, and unpredictable. Her posture, once relaxed and poised, subtly stiffened. Her gaze, previously warm and engaged, narrowed with an intensity that seemed to signal a deeper, unspoken frustration. What had moments earlier felt like a routine, polished interview, carefully structured, professionally guided, and comfortably paced, began to unravel thread by thread. Her earlier remarks, which initially came across as thoughtful observations delivered with calm restraint, gradually took on a sharper edge. Each sentence began to carry more weight, more intention, and more pointed emphasis, as if she were no longer merely responding to questions, but actively challenging the framework of the conversation itself. Her words evolved into a broader critique, not just of the interview at hand, but of the very nature of media interactions, taking aim at interviewers who, in her view, lacked the intellectual depth, cultural awareness, and emotional intelligence required to handle conversations that demanded nuance and sensitivity. The shift caught everyone off guard, particularly Michael, who had until that moment been guiding the discussion with practiced ease. A seasoned professional, he quickly recognized the change in tone and attempted to recalibrate. Maintaining his composure, he offered a polite smile, leaned slightly forward, and interjected with carefully worded clarifications designed to soften the moment and steer the discussion back towards safer, more neutral territory. His voice remained steady, his phrasing diplomatic, as he tried to bridge the growing divide. But each attempt to redirect seemed to have the opposite effect. Rather than diffusing the tension, Meghan appeared to interpret these interventions as dismissive or insufficient. She leaned further into her stance, her delivery becoming more deliberate, her cadence slower but more forceful. There was a growing sense that she was no longer interested in participating within the traditional boundaries of the interview format. Instead, she was reshaping it, challenging it, pushing it into unfamiliar and uncomfortable territory. Her words became increasingly direct, moving from generalized critique to something more personal. She began to question not just the line of questioning, but the assumptions behind it. Then, more pointedly, she seemed to question Michael himself, his approach, his preparation, even his ability to engage in the kind of layered, meaningful dialogue she expected. The subtext was unmistakable. This was no longer a collaborative exchange, but a confrontation of perspectives. The atmosphere in the studio shifted almost palpably. Moments earlier, the space had been alive with the quiet efficiency of a well-rehearsed production. Camera operators adjusting angles, crew members moving discreetly, producers monitoring from behind glass with calm focus. Now, an uneasy stillness took hold. Movement slowed, then stopped altogether. Conversations ceased. Even the ambient noise of equipment seemed to fade into the background, overtaken by the weight of the unfolding moment. Crew members exchanged uncertain glances, their body language reflecting a shared question. Should we intervene? Producers leaned toward one another, whispering urgently, weighing the risks of stepping in against the unpredictability of letting the moment continue. In a live or near-live setting, every second mattered, and every decision carried consequences. Meanwhile, the cameras continued to roll. Every expression, every pause Every subtle shift in tone was being captured in real time. The red recording lights, once a symbol of routine production, now felt like silent witnesses to something far more volatile and uncontained. Michael, to his credit, remained composed. Drawing on his experience, he made multiple attempts to de-escalate. He acknowledged her points where possible, nodding thoughtfully, offering brief affirmations in an effort to validate her perspective without conceding control of the conversation. He adjusted his tone, softer, more measured, carefully avoiding language that might be perceived as confrontational. At times, he even allowed longer pauses, giving space in hopes that the intensity might naturally subside. But the rhythm of the interview had already fractured. Instead of a smooth back and forth, the conversation became fragmented, overlapping dialogue, interrupted thoughts, and stretches of silence that carried more tension than any spoken words. Meghan's responses grew longer, more impassioned, leaving little room for interjection. When Michael did attempt to speak, his words were often cut short or redirected, further reinforcing the imbalance that had taken hold. What was once a structured dialogue had transformed into something raw and unscripted, a moment of live television that felt less like an interview and more like a collision of perspectives, unfolding in real time with no clear resolution in sight. The emotional undercurrent in the room deepened. There was discomfort, certainly, but also a sense of witnessing something unusually candid. Beneath the tension lay a glimpse into the complexities of public personas, media dynamics, and the pressures that accompany both. It was no longer just about the questions being asked or the answers being given. It was about control, perception, and the fragile balance between authenticity and professionalism. Behind the scenes, the stakes became increasingly clear. Producers understood that this moment, unpredictable and unfiltered, could define the segment, perhaps even overshadow everything else in the broadcast. Ending it abruptly risked appearing censorious. Allowing it to continue risked escalation. It was a delicate line, and one that grew thinner with each passing second. Back on set, Michael made one final, deliberate attempt to regain footing. With calm precision, he reframed the discussion, broadening the scope, shifting away from personal critique toward a more general exploration of media responsibility and public discourse. It was a subtle pivot, designed to preserve dignity on both sides while guiding the conversation toward a more constructive endpoint. For a brief moment, it seemed to work. The intensity eased slightly. The pace slowed. There was a pause, a breath, a fleeting sense that the storm might pass. But the impact of what had already transpired lingered heavily in the air, because what had unfolded was not easily contained or forgotten. It was a moment that challenged expectations, disrupted norms, and exposed the underlying tensions that often remain hidden beneath the polished surface of televised conversation. A moment that tested not only the individuals involved, but the very structure of live broadcasting itself. Finally, Michael reached his breaking point, and the shift, though subtle at first, was unmistakable to anyone watching closely. The practiced calm that had defined his demeanor throughout the exchange gave way to something firmer, more resolute, as he drew a quiet but definitive line. With measured clarity and a tone that carried both authority and restraint, he addressed the situation head-on, acknowledging that what had begun as a professional dialogue had veered into territory that could no longer be justified as constructive discourse. There was no anger in his voice, no dramatic escalation, just a controlled, deliberate firmness that made his message all the more powerful. He emphasized the importance of maintaining mutual respect, not only for the sake of those involved in the conversation, but also for the audience watching, who expected a standard of professionalism even in moments of disagreement. For a brief second, it seemed as though time itself slowed. The studio, already tense, became utterly still, as if everyone present sensed that something significant was about to happen. Then, in a move that no one had anticipated and few had ever witnessed in such a setting, he made a decisive choice. He stood up. The simple act carried enormous weight, signaling not just the end of the interview, but a refusal to allow the situation to continue on terms he deemed inappropriate. Without raising his voice or resorting to theatrics, he concluded the segment on the spot, effectively reclaiming control of a moment that had spiraled beyond its intended boundaries. The reaction was immediate yet silent. The studio fell into a profound hush, the kind that feels almost physical, pressing in on everyone present. Crew members froze mid-action, unsure whether to proceed or hold position, their instincts caught between protocol and the unprecedented nature of what had just unfolded. Behind the cameras, producers exchanged stunned looks, their earlier tension now replaced by a mixture of disbelief and urgency as they processed the implications of what had just occurred in real time. At the center of it all, Meghan Markle appeared visibly shaken, not in an exaggerated or dramatic fashion, but in a way that suggested the gravity of the moment had fully registered. The composure she had maintained, even during the most intense parts of the exchange, seemed to falter ever so slightly as she gathered her belongings, her movements more deliberate, more contained, as though she were recalibrating in the aftermath of an unexpected conclusion. The cameras, still rolling, captured every detail: the quiet rustle of movement, the lingering tension, the unspoken emotions that filled the space where words had abruptly ceased. It was no longer just an interview. It had become a moment of television history unfolding in real time, raw and unfiltered. Michael, meanwhile, did not rush. After a brief pause, just long enough to let the moment settle, he turned back toward the camera, his expression composed, his posture steady. Drawing on the same professionalism that had defined his career, he addressed the audience directly, his voice calm, but purposeful as he reiterated the values he believed should guide any public conversation: respect, accountability, and the ability to engage in dialogue without crossing into personal attack. His words were not accusatory, nor were they defensive. Instead, they carried a sense of reflection, as though he were inviting viewers to consider not just what had happened, but why it mattered. There was a quiet conviction in his delivery, a recognition that moments like this, while uncomfortable, reveal something deeper about the nature of communication in an increasingly scrutinized public space. As he finished speaking, there was a brief, almost imperceptible pause, then the familiar transition. The show cut to commercial. Yet even as the broadcast shifted away from the studio, the weight of what had just occurred lingered, extending far beyond the confines of that single segment. In control rooms, in living rooms, and across social platforms, reactions began to form almost instantly. Some viewers would see Michael's decision as a necessary assertion of boundaries, a stand for professionalism in the face of escalating tension. Others might question whether the situation could have been salvaged, whether a different approach, more patience, more redirection, more willingness to absorb criticism, might have led to a less abrupt conclusion. The debate, inevitable and immediate, spoke to the complexity of the moment itself, because what had unfolded was not easily categorized as right or wrong. It existed in a space where principles, personalities, and pressures intersected in unpredictable ways. For those in the studio, the silence that followed would not be quickly forgotten, a silence filled not just with shock, but with the awareness that they had just witnessed a rare breach in the carefully maintained structure of broadcast television. For Meghan, the moment marked an abrupt end to a conversation that had taken an unexpected turn, leaving open questions about intent, interpretation, and the challenges of navigating public discourse under intense scrutiny. And for Michael, it was a defining decision, one that would likely be analyzed, debated, and revisited long after the cameras stopped rolling. In the end, the question that lingered was not just whether he was right to end the interview or whether he could have handled it differently, but what the moment revealed about the evolving expectations placed on public figures, journalists, and the delicate balance between free expression and professional responsibility. It was a moment that resisted simple answers, inviting instead a deeper consideration of how conversations unfold when the boundaries that usually contain them begin to break down, and what it means to step in, draw a line, and say with quiet certainty that enough is enough.